There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over you at 3 in the morning. Not the quiet of sleep, but the quiet of wakefulness. Your phone glows softly in the darkness, and you find yourself scrolling through the highlight reels of lives that seem to be moving forward at a speed you can't quite match. A college friend is announcing a promotion. Someone from high school just bought a house. A classmate got married last summer. And here you are, still here, still trying, still waiting for the moment when life feels like it finally begins. This feeling has become so familiar that you've stopped noticing how heavy it is, like wearing a coat in winter for so long that you forget you're wearing it, until spring arrives and you suddenly realize the weight you've been carrying. Except spring hasn't arrived yet. The calendar keeps turning, the seasons keep changing, and you remain suspended in a particular kind of stasis, not stuck exactly, but perpetually aware that you're not where you thought you'd be by now. The cruel irony is that you're not lazy, you're not unambitious, you're not without capability. Yet somehow, the gap between where you are and where you're supposed to be has become the central fact of your existence. It colours every achievement with a tinge of melancholy. It whispers that whatever you accomplish is somehow insufficient, always arriving a moment too late. And so you live with this paradox, moving forward yet feeling fundamentally left behind. To understand why you feel behind, we must travel backward, not to blame the past, but to recognize the origins of a pattern so deeply woven into your psychology that you've mistaken it for truth itself. For many, this feeling begins not in adulthood, but in childhood, in moments so subtle and pervasive that they become invisible. Perhaps you grew up in a household where love was conditional, not withheld exactly, but calibrated. You received warmth and approval when you achieved, when you performed, when you exceeded expectations. Your worth was indexed to your accomplishments. The message wasn't always spoken aloud, but it was there in the tenor of conversation, in what was celebrated and what was overlooked. You learned quietly and without fanfare that you were only as valuable as your next achievement. And crucially, that achievement was never quite enough. There was always a higher ceiling, a further horizon, a more impressive peer to measure yourself against. This is where a psychological concept called conditional regard takes root. Conditional regard is the experience of being valued not for your inherent worth, but for meeting someone else's standards. When a child grows up receiving praise primarily for achievement rather than being, they internalize a fundamental belief: I am only worthy insofar as I am productive. This isn't a thought you consciously hold. It's deeper than that. It becomes the lens through which you interpret reality, the invisible filter that colors your self-perception. And here's where it becomes particularly insidious. This conditional regard doesn't disappear when you leave home. It metastasizes. It becomes your inner critic, your internal measuring stick, your constant companion. You've carried your parents' conditional approval into adulthood and transformed it into self-imposed conditional approval. You are now both the judge, the taskmaster and the exhausted laborer. You have internalized the very standard that once made you feel perpetually insufficient. But conditional regard doesn't work alone. It often travels alongside another psychological pattern, social comparison and the internalization of others' timelines. Consider the vignette of a young woman named Claire. She was always a good student, always conscientious, always on a conventional track. But around age 25, while her peers were entering their careers with confidence, Claire found herself switching majors, changing paths, starting over. By conventional metrics, she was behind. But here's what happened in her mind. She didn't simply evaluate her situation objectively. Instead, she conducted what psychologists call upward social comparison, automatically comparing herself to those doing better and rarely to those doing worse. She saw the promotions of her former classmates, the houses and weddings and achievements, but she didn't see their struggles, their failures, their private doubts. She only saw the finished product and measured her in-progress journey against everyone else's highlight reel. The feeling of being behind wasn't based on an objective assessment of her life. It was based on a systematically biased comparison. This brings us to a second psychological concept: The hedonic treadmill, combined with what researchers call the arrival fallacy. The hedonic treadmill describes how quickly we adapt to achievements and return to our baseline level of happiness. You accomplish something significant, you get the job, you finish the project, you reach the goal, and for a moment you feel the arrival. But within weeks, sometimes days, the achievement normalizes. It becomes your new baseline. And suddenly, you're focused again on what's next, what's missing, what you still haven't done. The goalposts are always moving. The finish line keeps receding. The arrival fallacy is the belief that happiness and wholeness will finally arrive once you reach a particular milestone. Once you're promoted, you'll feel successful. Once you're married, you'll feel complete. Once you buy the house, you'll feel settled. Except you never do. Because the human mind is extraordinarily sophisticated at finding new deficits, new gaps, new reasons to feel insufficient. You were behind before the achievement, and somehow you're still behind after it. Think of David, a man who spent his 20s and early 30s obsessed with career advancement. He felt painfully aware that he'd started his professional journey later than his peers, that he had ground to make up. He worked with an intensity that bordered on obsessive, sacrificing relationships and health and joy on the altar of catching up. When he was finally promoted to a senior position in his mid-30s, he felt a moment of vindication. Finally, he thought, I'm on track. But within months, a new insecurity emerged. He was older than others in his position. He should have been here years ago. Now he was behind in terms of tenure, in terms of the trajectory curve he should have been on. The goalposts had moved. The feeling of insufficiency had simply shape-shifted into a new form. This is perhaps the most difficult truth about feeling behind. The feeling is not primarily about the external facts of your life. It's about an internal relationship you have with yourself and time. It's about a story you're telling about what should have happened by now, about where you should be, about what it means that you're not there. And so you live. You do this, you work harder, you push further, you sacrifice small joys for abstract future achievements. You do this because somewhere deep inside, you believe that if you just move fast enough, if you just achieve enough, if you just catch up, then finally, you'll feel okay. You'll feel like you belong to your own life. You do this in your relationships too. You approach new connections with a desperate kind of hope. Maybe this person will make me feel like I'm on track. Maybe loving someone will fill the gap I feel inside. And at first it does, for a while. But then you find yourself measuring the relationship against some invisible standard of how things should look by now, how serious it should be, whether it's progressing at the right pace. You love the person, but you're also checking off boxes, evaluating whether they fit into the timeline that you believe your life should follow. And your partner, though they don't always realize it, can sense this evaluation. They can feel that they're not just being loved for who they are, but being assessed for whether they help you feel less behind. You do this at work, you arrive early and leave late. You say yes to projects that terrify you because you believe that's how you catch up. You suppress doubts and insecurities because admitting uncertainty feels like admitting you're falling further behind. You watch colleagues with less experience receive recognition, and you feel the familiar sting. I should be further along. I should be more accomplished by now. I should be the one being recognized. The work itself becomes tainted by the undercurrent of insufficiency. You're not doing it because it's meaningful or because you're proud of it. You're doing it because you're running from a feeling, trying to outpace a shadow that moves at exactly your speed. You wonder why. Why can't you simply enjoy what you have? Why can't you see the genuine accomplishments, the real ways you've grown, the meaningful relationships you've built? You can see these things when you pause and really look, and yet the baseline, the underlying hum of your psychology remains. Not enough, not yet, still behind. In your solitude, the conversation becomes even more pointed. Your inner dialogue, which should be a source of encouragement and self-compassion, has become a courtroom. You lie awake and catalogue your failures. You replay moments where you should have done more, said more, been more. You construct elaborate narratives about all the doors that closed, because you weren't where you needed to be when you needed to be there. And these narratives feel true, don't they? They feel like observations rather than interpretations, like facts rather than stories. But they're not. They're interpretations colored by a fundamental belief that your current state is inherently inadequate. Your sense of self-worth, the bedrock of your psychology, becomes contingent on forward motion. When you're achieving, when you can point to progress, you feel okay. You feel like maybe you're catching up. But in the quiet moments, in the spaces between accomplishments, the ground beneath you feels unstable. Who are you if you're not advancing? What is your value if you're simply being, without the accomplishment to justify it? This is perhaps the most insidious part of the pattern. It conditions you to believe that rest is failure, that stillness is stagnation, that a moment not spent moving forward is a moment wasted. Your relationships with your own milestones become distorted. You reach goals and they feel hollow because you're so focused on the next horizon. A friend celebrates an accomplishment with you, but you're already mentally 5 steps ahead, thinking about what's missing. You attend celebrations, graduations, promotions, engagements, and instead of feeling joy, you feel the pressure intensify. Another milestone you haven't reached. Another reminder of the gap. It's as though you're living in fast forward while watching everyone else's lives in real time, and you can never quite synchronize with the present moment, with the actual reality of your life as it is. The irony cuts deep. The very mechanism you've developed to help you catch up, this relentless self-criticism, this constant striving, this measuring and comparing, is the mechanism that ensures you'll never actually feel caught up. You've created a psychological system where satisfaction is structurally impossible. You've built an engine that runs on dissatisfaction, and you've convinced yourself that this engine is what will save you. But here's what's true, and what you need to hear. The feeling of being behind is not a diagnosis, it's a symptom. It's not a reflection of reality. It's a reflection of a particular relationship you have with yourself and time. And relationships can change. The first reframe is this: the timeline you're measuring yourself against is not a timeline. It's a story. It's a story about what should have happened, when it should have happened, in what order it should have happened. But life doesn't move in timelines. It moves in seasons, in cycles, in spirals. You move at the pace you move at because of 1,000 factors, some within your control, most not. Some people start their careers at 22. Others start at 35. Some people know their path early. Others spend years finding it. Some people move through life with a clear destination. Others discover their destination by walking. None of these paths is behind, they're just different paths. Consider the concept of self-compassion, which psychologist Kristin Neff defines as treating yourself with the same kindness you would offer a good friend. When your best friend is struggling, you don't berate them for being behind. You don't remind them of how far they still have to go. You listen, you acknowledge the difficulty, you remind them that their worth isn't tied to their productivity. You might say, you're doing your best with what you have, and that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. The profound shift happens when you extend this same compassion to yourself. Not as weakness, not as settling, but as a recognition that self-criticism is not a motivational tool. It's a wound. It's been a wound the whole time. The second reframe is about presence, the feeling of being behind lives entirely in a comparison between your current reality and an imagined future. It lives in the gap, but your actual life, the one worth living, the one that contains joy and meaning and beauty, is happening right now. Not when you're further along, not when you've caught up. Now. This is what Buddhists mean by mindfulness, not as a trendy wellness concept, but as a genuine return to the only moment that actually exists. You are not behind in this moment. You are not behind while you're holding your loved one's hand. You are not behind while you're watching the light change through a window. You are not behind while you're doing work that genuinely matters to you. The feeling of being behind evaporates when you fully inhabit the present moment, because it has no foothold there. The third reframe is about redefining success. You've been measuring success by external metrics: the job title, the salary, the relationship status, the square footage of the house. But these external metrics are, by design, never completed. There's always a higher title, more money, a bigger house. The hedonic treadmill is real and relentless. What if, instead, you defined success differently? What if success meant knowing yourself more deeply than you did a year ago? What if it meant having one relationship where you feel truly seen? What if it meant doing work that aligns with your values regardless of whether anyone acknowledges it? What if it meant being able to sit quietly with yourself without the constant hum of insufficiency? This isn't settling. This is wisdom. This is the difference between chasing external validation forever and building a life that actually feels like yours. The fourth reframe is about time itself. Time is not a racetrack with a finish line. Time is the medium in which you're alive. You're not trying to catch up to some imaginary point on a track. You're trying to live well within the time you have. And the paradox is that the moment you stop trying so frantically to catch up, the moment you release the grip on some imaginary destination, time suddenly feels different. There's more of it. It moves more slowly. It becomes more textured, more real, more yours. This is what Keats meant when he wrote about negative capability. The ability to exist in mystery and doubt without irritably reaching after fact and reason. It's the ability to exist in your current moment without needing to justify it, defend it, or escape it. The healing metaphor is this: healing doesn't mean the wound disappears. It means the wound stops defining the whole of who you are. You carry the scar, yes. You remember the conditioning that created this pattern, yes. You understand why you feel behind, yes. But you've decoupled it from your worth. The scar has become simply a scar, not a verdict, not a definition, not a life sentence. And in that decoupling, something shifts. You become able to access compassion for yourself. You become able to notice when the old pattern is starting to activate. The self-criticism, the measuring, the comparing. And you can gently, lovingly acknowledge it, without following it into the abyss. This is not about forcing yourself to feel like you're not behind. It's about recognizing that the feeling of being behind was never accurate to begin with. It was always a story, a compelling story, written in the language of psychology and conditioning and pain, but a story nonetheless. And you have the capacity to write a different story, not a story where everything is perfect and you never struggle, but a story where you are enough as you are, right now. Not enough in the future when you've achieved more. Enough now. Enough in this moment. Enough in the ordinary, unglamorous reality of your actual life. The final truth is this: the people you admire, the ones whose lives seem so clearly ahead of yours, are struggling with their own versions of this feeling. They are measuring themselves against their own imagined standards. They are running on their own hedonic treadmills. They are wondering if they are enough. The difference is not that they've found the answer. The difference is that some of them, at some point, decided to stop asking the question. They decided that this moment, this life, this person they've become, is enough, is the real thing, the actual thing, the only thing that will ever matter. And you can decide that too. Not tomorrow when you've achieved more. Not when you've finally caught up. Not when you have the proof that you're not behind. But now. Right now. In this moment where you're hearing these words. In this moment where you can choose to lay down the burden you've been carrying and recognize it for what it is. Not a truth about you, but a pattern you inherited, internalized, and can now, gently and with fierce self-compassion, release. You are not behind. You are exactly where you need to be to become who you're meant to become. And that's not a platitude. That's the actual truth, waiting for you to recognize it.